In this review we take a look at another model that was a release for the Balmer exhibition in April 2019. The model is made by NZG and it's the Liebherr LRB 18. It is a machine from the foundation engineering sector and it's a piling and drilling rig. Out of the Liebherr branded box we have the usual expanded polystyrene trays and some super sharp knife work cuts the factory tape. There's a plastic base stored in the top of the top tray, and in the bottom tray there is the model. Included in the box is an instruction sheet, and it is a pictorial guide covering the assembly and some of the functionality. This model is unusual in that the first thing you have to do is to reeve up the crowd ropes. This is fiddly work and the instructions suggest using the rope puller in from the front side of the leader, but in practice this proved very difficult to do, so it's actually easier to go in from the back side. With this device you feed the wire in where the rope should be running, and you do that until it pokes out the other side. Once we have it there, we can feed the end of the rope through the loop that we have, and then we use the rope puller to pull the rope back through where we want it. In theory this is all good, but in practice it's quite a tough pull to get the rope through, and you have to hope that the wire doesn't break off of the rope puller. So with the rope pulled through on one pulley at the top of the leader, we can now run the other end down inside the sledge, and it then runs on down to the bottom of the leader. Now the instructions say that you should tie off the rope at the bottom of the leader, but actually it was much easier to tie it off at the top. So what we will do is feed in the rope through one hole and then turn it round and feed it back up the other hole. And in doing that we've now got the rope running from the top of the leader down to the bottom, and we can run it back up to the top again. At the top we use the rope puller again to pull the other end of the rope through the top of the leader. And here we can tie it off. One tip if you ever want to secure a tied off rope is just to apply a tiny dab of super glue to it. After that it's a matter of tidying up. The interesting thing about what we have done is that it adds no functionality, it's only detail, and because it's quite fiddly it would have been better if it had been done in the factory. The same is also probably true of the next piece of work, and that involves reeving up the auxiliary winch. The instructions suggest using the rope puller, but actually it's much easier just to carefully push out the two pins that surround the pulley wheel. With those out it's much easier to reeve the rope at the front, and it's quite easy after that to reinstall the two pins. On the real machine the auxiliary winch is at the back of the leader top, and using a finger and thumb you can just about rotate it. So having run enough rope at the front to reach the ground, we can then cut off the rope at the back. And to fix it to the drum, really the only way is to add a tiny bit of super glue to the end of the rope and then stick it on the drum. Yes, I know we don't like gluing things on cranes etc. But really this is a permanent fix, you'd never really ever want to take the rope off the drum. With the glue on we carefully push down on the rope to make it stick. And when it's dry we can then try to wind the rope onto the drum. So again, fiddly work, but you can do it, and you end up with a working auxiliary winch. The next piece of installation is to fix the hydraulic hoses that run from the sledge to the leader. Again, it's not clear why this wasn't fixed in the factory, and it's a surprise that the length of hose supplied isn't cut to the right length. So you do need to roughly measure up and make sure that the hose isn't too long when the sledge is at the bottom, and that it can also reach when the sledge is at the top. As always, it's best to measure twice and cut once. You can glue the connections if you want, but what we've done here is actually just to fold over the tip, and that makes the end of the hose stay in with a reasonably tight fit. That completes the model, but we can still assemble a display, and we use the base plate for that. It's plastic and there are pre-formed holes in it for some sheet piles. There's one long pile and some short ones, and they get pressed into the holes. We can then lift in the piling rig and carefully adjust it to connect up the vibrator to one of the pile heads. With that done, the model is finally ready to display. Looking underneath, and the metal crawler tracks are nicely formed with bolt head details, with the rest of the detailing on the underside being fairly simple. Looking at the track frame, you can see there are pins for working rollers, but on the review model those rollers do not actually turn. The cab is very detailed with nice looking window sills, and there is other detailing outside the cab, and that includes a fixed textured walkway. Up on top there's a guard for the window. There are access steps which lead up onto the top of the body, and there's some nice panel detailing. The counterweight block has got some sharp graphics, including a 5-ton marker on top. And on the opposite side there are some nice textured grills. There's also a plastic structure which has the video cameras. Up on top there's some very fine quality detailing with some excellent textured surfaces, and many different components are modelled in detail. That includes some excellent hydraulics modelling, with tiny components that have coloured highlighting. The leader inclination device and the radius adjustment are modelled in a convincing fashion. Also nice are the various runs of hydraulic hoses, and there are some nice connection details, and it would have been nice if the hoses were softer and hung more naturally. The leader top is very detailed, and there's a non-functioning rotation ram, and the auxiliary hook is just heavy enough to make the rope hang naturally. There are plenty of hydraulic hoses running to the LV20 vibrator, but it is not a separate part from the sledge, so you can't separate it. But the vibrator is a nice looking part. To complement the model there are nicely shaped sheet piles and a textured plastic base. Arriving on site is the LRB 18, and it makes a good looking load. Although it would have been nicer if the walkway outside the cab was folding, and if the handrails on top of the body could have been folded or removed. And ideally the vibrator would have been removable too. One nice touch though is that the tracks are retractable to narrow the transport width, and you can open them up to get a working configuration. To raise the leader up into a working position just requires some dexterity, and as you can see here the leader can be rotated and slid up and down. And there's a full range of movement on the hydraulic rams to get the leader up in a vertical position. The hydraulic rams are stiff, but they do hold any pose. Another feature is that the auxiliary winch at the top rotates, and as you see it here it's pinned in a shortened configuration, but if you take the small steel pin out, you can extend the winch out to get a bigger radius. Moving back down to the crawler tracks, and they are quite stiff, but you can rotate them by hand. And as you would expect, you can rotate the body to any position, although it was quite stiff and jerky on the review model. Once you've got the machine in position and ready to do some pile driving, then you can move the position of the sledge and vibrator, and to lock it in position you tighten up a screw which bears on the leader, but be careful not to over tighten it and scratch the paintwork. In the same way you can also adjust the height of the leader, and you lock that by tightening a different screw in just the same way. It's always good to see another piece of foundation engineering equipment modelled, because they are complex machines which are interesting to look at. This NZG model is high quality with very good details, and it just would have been nicer if some of the assembly had been done in the factory, and if the vibrator was removable. Overall though, it's certainly a very good model.